Hey folks, I'm Chuck Black. We're doing 52 weeks of Python in 10-minute sessions. Today's topic is comprehension. Specifically, I'll be talking about list comprehensions. Have you ever seen anything that looks like this and said to yourself, what the bleep is that? Well, I'm going to explain it to you. So let's get started. So let's talk about list comprehension. So you're going along and learning happily all about programming in Python, and you're pretty happy with the language because everything is fairly simple and straightforward. And then you come to a line of code somewhere that looks something like this. And you say, what the bleep is that? You look at this and you say, okay, this part here I understand. This part here, it looks like it's a list because it is square brackets. But then you look inside of it and you say, what the heck is this? There's a for loop inside of my allegedly Python list. What's going on here? But wait, it actually can get worse, because if you look down here at another example, here it's even more crazy and confusing. Here's a for loop in the middle of it. Here's my item.strip where I'm stripping something. But then there's an if statement tagged on to the end of it. So what the heck is going on here? This, my friends, is list comprehension. Let me take it apart and explain it to you. So in situations where I don't understand a piece of code, I like to try to take it apart into pieces that I do understand. So what pieces here do I understand? I understand this is an assignment statement. I understand, because you probably have seen this before, that when I have square brackets on the right hand side, that's an indication that this is going to be a list. So I know that the end result is going to be a list. Hey, here's a clue. There's a comment that says this is list comprehension. So I know the result is going to be a list. So let's start and work our way from the inside out. So here, let's start with this for statement. This is where I would start. For item in device string, that is this thing up here that I've defined, that I'm using in all of these examples. For item in device string dot split. So we've talked about string functions. We know that if I do a split on a particular character, in this situation it's a comma. So the end result is going to be a list of the separate strings. So it's going to be a list that contains that string and this string, etc. So this right here is a list, and a for loop that goes through a list, because I know that lists are iterable. That means I'm going to go through my for loop multiple times, and every time this value item is going to be equal to the next item in my list, which is created by this split statement. So the first time through, my item is going to be this value that I'm highlighting. The second time, it's going to be that. The last time through, it will be this piece right here. So I'm going to go through this. That's what my for statement is going to do. So this is like a for statement. I can kind of see this. Now, it's weird syntax, but basically the way that the people who do Python decided to do this is they said, okay, there's going to be one statement in this for loop, and my statement is going to be this thing right here. So what is my statement doing? Basically, it is taking item, which, remember, it's going to be this value right here the first time, this value right here the second time, etc. And then it's going to apply a strip function on it. Remember from our discussion of strings, strip is getting rid of the spaces at the beginning and at the end of that particular item. So when I say for item in device string dot split based on commas, what it's going to do is it's going to take this thing. The split is going to separate that into a list of all of these items here that I have been showing you. And then before it completes creating this list, it's going to perform a strip operation on each of these items. So at the end of the day, what I'm going to end up with is a number of this device right here is really a list, and it is going to have items that are these things, but without the beginning and ending spaces. If you recall from our string lesson, we spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to get rid of all of this beginning and ending blank space, and that is what this list comprehension here is doing. So when you see something that looks like this, that's a list comprehension, and working from inside out, that is exactly what it is doing. Now that you understand what it does, you say to me, well, couldn't we have just done exactly that same thing but using our normal for loop? And the answer is yes, you could. In fact, I've done that for you right here. In these 3 lines, I'm doing exactly the same thing. I create a device, which is a list. I do my for loop, which is exactly the same as what we just looked at. And then I do device.append to my list, and I'm doing item.strip. This is exactly the same thing. When I first learned Python, I saw somebody had done this, and I said, well, that's really stupid. This is a case of something that annoys me, which is using a idiom or a pattern or a way of doing things that just makes it confusing for newer people. So I ended up changing it into something like this. And then I realized once I got inside the world of Python more that everybody likes to do this stuff. And so I ended up in a situation where rather than fight it, I decided to join it. And hence you will have to come to that point of making that decision as well. But you are going to need to learn, if you look at anybody else's code, about list comprehensions. It is doing exactly this. Now, the next thing you may ask me is, hey, couldn't you make that a little bit simpler? Because this is a little bit confusing. There's too much going on right here. And the answer is yes. If I were to say device info list equals this thing, which is the latter part of my list comprehension, if I were to do that, then I can use device info list in my list comprehension. This, again, is exactly the same thing, but I've split it into 2 lines. I've taken device string.split, which you see up here, and I have set it equal. I've created that list in this thing called device info list, and now my list comprehension looks a little bit less intimidating, but it's doing the same thing. Now that I've shown you how to make it simpler, I'm going to show you how to make it more complex. So here is an example of a list comprehension, and this is exactly the same as what we had before, but look at this. It's a wacky if statement at the very end. What does that mean? Well, basically it says in this for loop, as you are taking all of these different items as you go through your iteration, I want you to apply this conditional, and my conditional is kind of silly. I'm just saying if the string, the substring stupid is not in item. If you recall from up here, you will recall that I added this extra thing right here. Well, I didn't add it. It's just there at the very end. Doesn't really make much sense, but it's serving the purpose of me not adding that to this list when I do my list comprehension. So not only do we have the for loop, not only do we have this function that I'm applying to the item from that for loop, but I'm also applying this if statement as well. Frankly, it's just like you had the if statement up here in this code. So that is a little bit more complicated way to do things. Okay, the very last thing is going to be the output. I'm going to run my comprehensions, and if we look at the output, here I'm using a for loop, and you can see everything is in a nice list, and it has had the leading and trailing white spaces removed. Here I did it using my first list comprehension, and the output is the same. Here I did it using my simpler list comprehension, and again the output is the same. And then I did using list comprehension with conditional at the end. Remember, I was only doing it if it didn't have this stupid stuff string in it, and so sure enough I ended up with that data. Now, just as an aside, I do have dictionary comprehension. If you want to learn about that, it's less frequently used, but you can definitely look at that in the long form version of this lesson. So that's it, list comprehensions. If you see something that looks like this, take it apart one piece at a time like I did, you'll be able to make sense of it and you won't be intimidated by list comprehensions anymore.